Mr. Chairman, Secretary Foxx, it's great to have you here with us. This is going to be a big year for our committee as we work to create this surface transportation bill. My focus has been, since the day one, is our nation's ports. I co-founded our Ports Caucus. We now have about 95 members who are dedicated to really advocating for our nation's ports. Chairman Schuster led a delegation. Many of us from this committee just went a couple weeks ago to see the Panama Canal expansion project and spent a lot of time talking amongst ourselves on what impact that expansion project would have on the United States ports and our ability to remain competitively globally competitive. So I appreciate your focus. My goal is, in this surface transportation bill, is to create a dedicated freight program. In my mind, this program should have a dedicated freight funding source which deposits into a trust fund, very similar to the Highway Trust Fund. I think freight projects are going to lose out if they always have to compete with all the other projects in this country with just the Highway Trust Fund. One of the recommendations of the 21st Century Panel on Freight Transportation gave us that recommendation that it should be a dedicated funding source. So in response to that, I'm going to reintroduce tomorrow the National Freight Network Trust Fund Act of 2015 with a bipartisan group of co-sponsors that will create a trust fund that should provide about $2 billion a year. My idea is to suggest that we divert 5% of our import fees in this country. We collect about $40 billion a year in our import fees, and just 5% of that, I think, would mean the difference to us really funding freight transportation projects in this country. And I think those who pay these import fees would appreciate us taking that money and putting it back into the Freight Network Trust Fund. So my question to you is, could you speak to that idea of having a dedicated funding source for freight projects in this country? Without that, do you think that the President's program, could fail to provide long-term solution to our freight bottlenecks in this country? And maybe comment a little bit about the last mile into our ports. Everybody's worried about how the Panama Canal expansion project will impact our ports. The West Coast ports are going to be impacted differently than the East Coast ports. And yet the greatest, I think, threat to diversion of cargo is our landside congestion in this country. And like you said, we've got to get it moved from point A to point B. And if you could just speak to, what do you think of this idea of dedicating money just for freight projects, and how do we make sure the last mile into our ports across this country are targeted for this kind of funding?
Well, we agree that there needs to be a dedicated freight program in this country. And in the Grow America Act, what we do is we put about $18 billion in place over 6 years. I think actually it's $28 billion over 6 years that are focused on freight. And we are agnostic in that program on the mode. So it can be ports, it can be rail, it can be highways, whatever is going to help us get stuff from one place to another faster, more efficient, and safe. So we do it through the same mechanism that we pay for the overall bill. That's our approach. But as we've said, if there are other ideas that emerge, we'll hear them out. Your question on the last and first mile is a critical question because in many places, the same areas that are highly dense, highly congested, are places where that first and last mile is a problem. So you need to have a lot of different strategies to deal with it. One strategy is, number one, making sure that the assets we have where those first and last miles occur doesn't fall apart on us. The second strategy is trying to expand capacity where we can And in some cases, like in the Los Angeles area, you may be constrained in terms of expanding lane miles. So there, the strategy may be working to get cars off the road so you create more capacity on the existing freeway. That means things like commuter rail, transit, and other strategies. And then the last thing is continuing to work to make sure the system is smarter. We have problems in this country with double stacking containers off of these big ships because some of our bridges aren't high enough to run rail under or run trucks under. And so we've got to figure out a way to address those issues on the surface system, as you said, to enhance our ability to.
Right, because these bigger ships that we know will now get to the Panama Canal. I mean, we're almost, are you tapping me?
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman?
I know my good friend from California cares about the ports, but we're over time, so I appreciate the
Okay,
Secretary
I yield
answer.
back.
I let him answer your question fully. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. With that, I yield to Ms.